Are you enjoying these untold Sherlock Holmes stories? If so, you can listen to even more exclusive Untold Sherlock Holmes adventures on my Patreon. Do check it out. The link is in the description below. The Adventure of the Scorched Green Bays. It was in the latter days of August, in the year 1887, that a singular heat-wave descended upon London, turning the great metropolis into a veritable oven of baking brick and suffocating asphalt. The aristocracy and the well-to-do had long since fled to the moors of Scotland or the breezes of the Solent, leaving behind a sweltering city of closed shutters and empty boulevards. For my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, this mass exodus of the criminal and the victimized alike resulted in a period of profound and dangerous ennui. For 3 days he had scarcely spoken a word, spending his waking hours pacing our sitting room at 221B Baker Street like a caged beast, or losing himself in a malodorous chemical experiment involving the distillation of coal tar derivatives. The air in our rooms, already thick with the oppressive summer heat, was rendered nearly unbreathable by the acrid fumes of his impromptu laboratory. "My dear Holmes," I ventured at last, wiping the perspiration from my brow and setting aside my medical journal, which I had been attempting to read for the past hour without comprehending a single syllable. "If you continue to boil that concoction, we shall both be forced into the street, which, given the present temperature, is akin to leaping from the frying pan into the fire." Holmes did not immediately reply. He held a glass test tube up to the light of the window, his sharp, aquiline features illuminated by the harsh afternoon sun. His grey eyes were narrowed in intense concentration. Presently he sighed, a sound of profound melancholy, and placed the tube in a wooden rack. "You are right, Watson," he murmured, throwing himself into his armchair and pulling his knees up to his chin. "The atmosphere is intolerable, yet it is nothing compared to the stagnation of my own mind. My brain, Watson, rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work, give me the most abstruse cryptogram or the most intricate analysis, and I am in my own proper atmosphere. I can dispense then with artificial stimulants. But I abhor the dull routine of existence. I crave for mental exaltation." "Surely," I said, "even the criminal classes must occasionally seek refuge from the heat." "Crime is common, logic is rare," Holmes retorted, his long, thin fingers tapping a restless tattoo upon the arm of his chair. "Therefore, it is upon the logic rather than upon the crime that you should dwell. But what is there to deduce in a city that has fallen asleep? The papers are devoid of interest. A petty theft in Cheapside, a drunken brawl in Whitechapel, hardly matters to engage the faculties of a specialist." He reached for his violin, his solace in times of inaction, and drew the bow languidly across the strings, producing a low, mournful wail that perfectly mirrored the oppressive lethargy of the afternoon. But the lamentation was cut short by the sharp, authoritative rap of the brass knocker on our downstairs door. Holmes paused, his bow suspended in mid-air. The unmistakable heavy tread of a large man ascending the 17 steps to our rooms echoed in the stairwell. A gentleman of military bearing, carrying a considerable weight of anxiety and suffering greatly from the heat, Holmes remarked, tossing the violin onto the settee. "And unless I am very much mistaken, he brings us precisely the mental exaltation I so desperately require." The door swung open to reveal a stout, red-faced gentleman in his late 50s. He was dressed immaculately in the fashion of a West End clubman, though his high collar was wilted, and he mopped his brow continuously with a large silk handkerchief. I recognized him at once. It was Major Prendergast, a man of some standing whom I had occasionally seen at the billiards tables of my own modest club, and whose life Holmes had once saved from a ruinous scandal involving the falsification of regimental mess accounts. "Holmes, thank God I found you in," the Major gasped, collapsing into the chair I hastily offered him. He breathed heavily, like a man who had run a great distance, though his patent leather boots showed no sign of dust. "My dear Major," Holmes said smoothly, leaning forward and steepling his fingers, "you appear distressed. I trust the heat has not entirely overwhelmed your constitution." "The heat is the least of my worries, Holmes," Prendergast replied, wiping his neck. "It is the Tankerville Club. We are facing a scandal that will tear the very fabric of the institution apart if it is not resolved. A scandal, sir, that involves cheating of the most devilish and inexplicable order." Holmes's eyes sparkled, and he rubbed his hands together with unconcealed glee. "Cheating at the Tankerville? How singularly interesting. I have always understood your club to be a bastion of impeccability, particularly in matters of the card table." "And so it was, the Major lamented. "We pride ourselves on our whist. We have the finest players in Europe among our members, but over the past 3 weeks an absolute scoundrel has been fleecing our most esteemed members of thousands of pounds, and we are utterly powerless to prove how he does it." "Pray compose yourself, Major Prendergast, and tell us the story from the beginning," Holmes said, gesturing to the sideboard. "Watson, pour our guest a glass of soda water. Now, Major, who is this man, and what is the exact nature of this infallible game he plays?" Prendergast took a long draught of the soda water and visibly steadied himself. "His name is Silas Vane. He was proposed for membership some 6 months ago by Lord Balmoral, who had met him in the south of France. Vane is a quiet man, of independent means, supposedly. Impeccable manners, softly spoken, entirely unassuming. For the first few months he played occasionally, winning some, losing some, perfectly ordinary." "And then?" Holmes prompted. "And then, 3 weeks ago, precisely when this infernal heat wave began, his game transformed. It is not merely that he wins, Holmes. It is how he wins. He plays his hands with a prescience that borders on the supernatural. He knows precisely when to hold back his trumps, and precisely where every key card in the deck is located. He plays as though the backs of our cards were transparent." I leaned forward, my interest piqued. "Surely, Major, sleight of hand? A marked deck? A rigged shuffle?" "Impossible, Dr. Watson," Prendergast insisted, shaking his heavy head. "That is the maddening crux of the matter. We are not fools at the Tankerville. When Lord Balmoral lost £800 in a single evening, we naturally became suspicious. We instituted the strictest precautions. The decks are newly unsealed before every rubber. The cards are shuffled by the dealer, cut by the player to the right, and dealt with excruciating slowness." "What of his physical person?" Holmes asked, his eyes half closed. "Mirrors, reflective surfaces, a confederate at the table?" "None of it!" the Major cried in exasperation. "The card-room is on the first floor, heavily panelled in matte oak. There are no mirrors." Vane plays with his sleeves rolled up, perfectly acceptable given the stifling temperature of the room. He never touches the cards, save to sort his own hand. He has no regular partner. We cut for partners, so he plays with everyone, and wins, regardless of who sits opposite him. Yet he knows. I swear to you, Holmes, he knows what is in my hand. Holmes sat in silence for a long moment, the smoke from the briar pipe he had just lit curling in blue wisps toward the ceiling. You say this remarkable streak of luck began 3 weeks ago. Did anything else change at the club at that time? A change in the room? A change in the staff? Nothing, save for the weather, Prendergast replied. It became so stifling that we were forced to throw open the large bay windows overlooking Pall Mall. Usually they are kept shut to muffle the sounds of the street, but the heat in the card-room with the gasoliers burning is unbearable otherwise. Holmes's eyes snapped open. Ah, the windows are open, and the card-room, you say, is on the first floor, looking directly down onto Pall Mall. Yes, it provides a balcony of sorts, though it is too narrow to stand upon. The windows are large, stretching nearly from floor to ceiling. And Vane's position at the table? He has no fixed position. As I said, we cut for seats. Yet the table itself remains stationary. Of course, it is a heavy mahogany piece, bolted to the floor in the centre of the room. Holmes sprang from his chair, all traces of his former lethargy vanishing in an instant. The transformation was miraculous. He was like a hound that had just caught the scent of the fox. "Excellent! Truly excellent!" he exclaimed, pacing the room with quick, eager strides. "A problem that appears entirely sealed, yet possesses a single glaring aperture. Major Prendergast, you have brought me a most exquisite puzzle." "But what are we to do, Holmes?" the Major pleaded. "Tonight is the final night of the month. Balmoral and Sir Charles are determined to win their money back, and they have challenged Vane to a high-stakes game. If Vane wins again, Sir Charles faces complete financial ruin. He has already mortgaged his estate in Kent. What time does this fateful game commence? At 9 o'clock this evening. Then Dr. Watson and I shall dine at our leisure, and we will join you at the Tankerville Club at 8:30. You will introduce us as guests from the country, Watson as a fellow medical man, and myself as an eccentric cousin with a passing interest in cards. Under no circumstances must Mr. Vane or anyone else know my true identity. You have my word, Holmes, but do you truly believe you can catch him out?" "I believe," Holmes said, a dangerous smile playing upon his thin lips, "that Mr. Silas Vane's supernatural prescience is about to suffer a most spectacular failure. Until tonight, Major." The Tankerville Club in Pall Mall was a paragon of Victorian exclusivity. As I followed Holmes and Major Prendergast through the heavy mahogany doors that evening, we stepped into a world of hushed tones, thick carpets, and the unmistakable aroma of fine cigars and aged port. The atmosphere was sombre, heavy with the unwritten rules of aristocratic masculinity. The card-room on the first floor was magnificent, but exactly as the Major had described, oppressively hot. The gasoliers blazed overhead, casting a brilliant, unforgiving light onto the green baize of the central table. To combat the sweltering August heat, the 3 massive bay windows overlooking the street had been thrown wide open. The muted rumble of hansom cabs, the occasional shout of a street vendor, and the clatter of horses' hooves drifted up from Pall Mall below. We were introduced to the assembled gentlemen. Lord Balmoral was a thin, nervous man whose hands trembled slightly as he poured himself a brandy. Sir Charles, facing the potential ruin of his Kentish estate, was pale and grim-faced. And then there was Silas Vane. I studied the man intently as he exchanged polite pleasantries with Holmes. Vane was entirely unremarkable, which in my experience as a medical man and an observer of humanity often proved to be a most effective disguise. He was of medium height, with pale, thinning hair and a neat, unostentatious moustache. His eyes were a watery blue, betraying no emotion whatsoever. He wore a crisp evening shirt, the sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows, revealing pale, hairless forearms, devoid of any concealed apparatus. His hands were clean, his fingernails impeccably trimmed. He seemed the very picture of an innocuous, slightly bored gentleman of leisure. "A warm evening for cards, gentlemen," Vane remarked in a soft, melodious voice. "But one must pass the time. Shall we cut?" The cut decreed that Vane would partner with Lord Balmoral against Sir Charles and Major Prendergast. Holmes and I took seats in comfortable leather armchairs, positioned a polite distance from the table, affording us a clear view of the players and the room. The game commenced. I consider myself a fair judge of whist, and I watched the proceedings with a critical eye, looking for the sleight of hand or the subtle signals I assumed must be the foundation of Vane's success. But as the play progressed, I saw absolutely nothing amiss. Vane touched the cards only when it was his turn. He did not tap his fingers, he did not cough, he did not shift in his seat. He barely looked up from the green baize. Yet his play was undeniably uncanny. In the third hand, Sir Charles led with the Queen of Hearts. Vane, holding the king, ace and a low heart, casually played the low card, allowing the Queen to take the trick. It was a bizarre, seemingly foolish move, until it was revealed that Major Prendergast held no hearts at all and would have trumped the king had Vane played it. Vane had known with absolute certainty that Prendergast was void in the suit. Sir Charles gasped, his face turning an ashen grey. Vane merely smiled politely. "A lucky guess, Sir Charles. The heat must be affecting my judgment, though fortune seems to favour the foolish tonight." I glanced at Holmes. To my profound annoyance, my friend appeared completely disinterested in the game. He had slouched down in his armchair, his long legs stretched out before him, his eyes closed, and his fingertips pressed together in his customary attitude of reflection. He looked for all the world as if he had fallen asleep. I felt a surge of embarrassment. The Major was relying on us, and Holmes was practically snoring. I returned my attention to the table, determined to spot the cheat myself. I scrutinized Vane's eyes, looking for any reflection in the glass of the gasoliers. I watched his feet beneath the table. I studied the pattern of the cards on the baize. Nothing. The man was a sphinx. Outside, the clamour of the street continued. Amidst the rattle of wheels and the distant chime of a clock tower, I noticed a persistent, irritating sound. A stray dog, somewhere in the street below, was barking. It was a sharp, yapping sound, a terrier by the pitch of it. Yip, 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 yip. The noise was a minor annoyance, blending into the tapestry of the city night, but in the tense silence of the card-room it grated on the nerves. "Confound that animal," Sir Charles muttered, glaring toward the open window. Can someone not chase it away?" "It is merely a street cur, Sir Charles," Vane murmured, sorting his hand. "Do not let it distract you. The play is yours." I looked at Holmes again. His eyes were still closed, but his head was tilted slightly toward the window. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played upon his lips. Suddenly Holmes opened his eyes and stood up. "Gentlemen," he said loudly, startling the players, "I find the heat of this room entirely too oppressive. I fear a migraine is coming on. Watson, if you would be so kind as to remain and represent our interests, I shall step out to secure a breath of fresh air." Before I could protest, Holmes turned on his heel and strode briskly from the room. Prendergast shot me a look of pure despair. I could offer him only a helpless shrug. For the next hour I sat in agonizing silence as Silas Vane systematically dismantled his opponents. His performance was flawless. By the end of the second rubber, the financial devastation was complete. Vane had won an astronomical sum. "Well, gentlemen," Vane said, neatly stacking his winnings and rising from the table, "a most stimulating evening. Sir Charles, my condolences on your luck. Major, a pleasure as always." As Vane prepared to depart, the heavy door of the card-room swung open, and Sherlock Holmes stepped back inside. He looked distinctly unkempt. His collar was undone, there was a smudge of soot on his cheek, and his coat smelled strongly of damp alleys and cheap shag tobacco. Yet his eyes were blazing with a fierce, triumphant light. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Vane?" Holmes asked, stepping directly into the man's path. "Before the game is truly concluded?" Vane paused, his watery blue eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "The rubbers are finished, sir, and I do not believe I caught your name." "My name," Holmes declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "is Sherlock Holmes, and I am here at the behest of this club to unmask you as the most ingenious, yet ultimately transparent, card-sharp in London." A stunned silence fell over the room. Sir Charles leapt from his chair, his face suffused with sudden hope. Lord Balmoral gasped. Major Prendergast stepped forward, his fists clenched. Vane, however, did not lose his composure. He offered a thin, mocking smile. "Sherlock Holmes, the consulting detective? How theatrical! But I am afraid you have made a grave error, Mr. Holmes. I have been watched by half a dozen men tonight. I have touched nothing I should not. I have employed no trickery. If you accuse me of cheating, you must prove it, or face a ruinous suit for slander." "Oh, I intend to prove it," Holmes said cheerfully, stepping past Vane and walking toward the large bay windows. "You are quite right, Mr. Vane. You did not cheat at this table. You brought no marked cards. You employed no sleight of hand. To look for the source of your prescience within the four walls of this room was a fool's errand. Major Prendergast provided the key to the mystery this afternoon when he mentioned the heat wave and the necessity of leaving these large windows open." Holmes gestured expansively out into the London night. "Come here, Watson. Look out into Pall Mall. What do you see directly opposite us?" I walked to the window and peered out into the darkness. "A row of buildings, Holmes. A tobacconist on the ground floor and what appears to be a lodging house above it. The windows are dark. Look closely at the window on the first floor, directly parallel to our own, the one with the curtains drawn back." I strained my eyes. The light from the club's gasoliers spilled out into the street, faintly illuminating the facade of the building opposite. In the depths of the open window across the street I saw a faint metallic glint. "There is someone sitting in the dark over there," I said, astonished. "Precisely," Holmes said. "A man sitting in the dark, armed with an exceedingly powerful naval spyglass. Consider the geometry of our situation, Watson. This card room is brilliantly lit. The windows are huge. The card table is positioned in the centre of the room. When the gentlemen hold up their cards to sort them, the brightly illuminated faces of those cards are perfectly visible to an observer equipped with a strong telescope in the window directly opposite." Sir Charles let out a roar of comprehension. "The blackguard! He's reading our hands from across the street." "Indeed," Holmes nodded. "But reading the hands is only half the problem. How does the accomplice transmit this invaluable information to Mr. Vane at the table without arousing suspicion? A flashing light would be noticed. A telegraph wire is impossible. Hand signals could not be seen without Vane turning his head and staring out the window, which he never did. He needed a signal that was audible, yet perfectly commonplace, an ambient sound that belongs so naturally to the streets of London that the gentlemen of the Tankerville Club would entirely ignore it. I felt a sudden, electrifying shock of realization. "The dog!" I cried. "The terrier!" Holmes beamed at me. "Excellent, Watson. You are progressing famously. Yes, the dog. When I left the room an hour ago, I did not go for fresh air. I went across the street. I made my way into the alleyway behind the lodging-house, slipped past the rather inattentive landlady, and ascended to the first floor. There, in the room opposite ours, I found a disgraced former bookmaker named Higgins, a man known to the police for various petty frauds. He was sitting in a chair, peering through a brass telescope. Holmes turned back to Vane, whose previously calm facade was finally beginning to crack. A bead of sweat trickled down Vane's pale cheek. In Higgins's lap, Holmes continued relentlessly, was a rather scruffy Jack Russell Terrier. Higgins held the dog by the scruff of its neck. The code, Mr. Vane, was elegant in its simplicity. Higgins did not need to transmit every card. That would take far too long. He merely signalled the location of the highest trumps, or warned you when an opponent was entirely void of a suit. A sharp pinch to the tail produced a high-pitched yap, signalling danger in the lead suit. A pinch to the ear meant a low bark, indicating the commanding card lay to your left. Mr. Vane, sitting at the table, simply listened to the rhythm of the yapping cur in the street below, translating the barks into a perfect mental map of his opponent's weaknesses. The room erupted. Sir Charles lunged forward, grabbing Vane by the lapels of his immaculate shirt. "You thief! You absolute scoundrel! I will see you hang for this!" "Unhand me!" Vane hissed, struggling to break free. His composure had entirely vanished, replaced by the cornered panic of a trapped rat. "Let him go, Sir Charles!" Holmes commanded, his voice slicing through the chaos. "Violence will not recover your money, nor will it serve the dignity of the Tankerville Club." Sir Charles shoved Vane backward, leaving the cheat breathless and dishevelled. "Then what do we do with him, Holmes? Call for the police?" Major Prendergast stepped forward, his face a mask of grim authority. "A police trial would mean a public scandal. The papers would drag the name of the Tankerville Club through the mud. We would be a laughing-stock, the gentlemen who were swindled by a stray dog." "I agree," Holmes said softly. "The law is a blunt instrument, and some matters are best handled with precision behind closed doors. "Mr. Vane, you are an intelligent man. You know the game is up. My colleague, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, is currently waiting downstairs in a hansom cab. I arranged for his presence before I arrived. He has, at this very moment, your accomplice Higgins in custody, along with the telescope and the terrier." Vane swallowed hard, his watery eyes darting rapidly around the room, looking for an escape that did not exist. "Here are your options," Holmes dictated, his tone colder than the ice in Lord Balmoral's glass. "You will immediately draft a cheque, fully reimbursing Sir Charles, Lord Balmoral, and every other member of this club you have defrauded over the past 3 weeks. You will then write a letter of resignation to the club committee, citing ill health. You will depart London on the first train tomorrow morning, and you will never set foot in the Tankerville Club, or indeed any respectable establishment in this city, ever again. If you refuse, I will open that door, invite Inspector Lestrade inside, and you shall face a magistrate tomorrow morning for grand larceny and conspiracy to defraud." Vane looked at the faces of the men surrounding him, men he had systematically robbed with an air of aristocratic superiority. He saw no mercy, only the cold fury of betrayed gentlemen. Slowly his shoulders slumped. The arrogant posture collapsed. Under the grim oversight of Major Prendergast, Vane stepped to a writing desk in the corner. His hand trembled violently as he penned the necessary bank drafts and a brief, humiliating letter of resignation. When he finished, he threw the pen down, grabbed his hat, and slunk from the room without another word. It was past midnight when Holmes and I finally returned to the familiar sanctuary of 221B Baker Street. The oppressive heat of the day had finally broken, and a cool, refreshing rain was falling over London, washing away the dust and the stagnation of the long afternoon. Holmes threw off his coat and immediately went to the sideboard, pouring us both a generous measure of brandy. He looked entirely rejuvenated. The dark clouds of his earlier depression had vanished, replaced by the sharp electric energy that always accompanied the successful conclusion of a problem. "A most satisfying evening, Watson," Holmes declared, handing me a glass and throwing himself into his armchair. "I must confess, the Tankerville Club scandal provided precisely the mental tonic I required. A fascinating study in the misdirection of attention." "It was brilliant, Holmes," I said warmly, taking a sip of the brandy. "Yet, I must admit, I am still astounded by the sheer audacity of the scheme. To use a dog as a telegraph system, it is almost comical." "Comical, perhaps, but undeniably effective," Holmes replied, striking a match and relighting his briar pipe. "It highlights a fundamental truth of human perception, Watson. We are conditioned to ignore the commonplace. Had Vane's accomplice used a mechanical clicking device or a flashing mirror, the gentlemen of the club would have discovered the ruse within an hour. Such things are unnatural to the environment. But a dog barking in a London street? It is as invisible as the very air we breathe. It is background noise. Vane relied upon the psychological blindness of his victims, and in that he was a master." "But how did you deduce the rhythm so quickly?" I asked. "You listened for mere minutes before you left the room." "It was a process of elimination, my dear doctor," Holmes explained, puffing a cloud of thick blue smoke toward the ceiling. "When the impossible has been eliminated, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." I observed Vane at the table. I saw at once that he possessed no mechanical aids, and his hands were entirely clean of trickery. Therefore, the information was coming from outside the immediate vicinity of the table. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes bright. I noted the open windows necessitated by the heat wave. I noted the brightly lit room and the dark street outside. This immediately suggested an external observer, but the method of communication was the missing link. I closed my eyes and isolated every sensory input in the room. I eliminated the shuffling of the cards, the breathing of the men, the clinking of glasses. And what was left? The dog, I said. Precisely. I listened to the dog. At first it seemed random, but as I monitored the play, I began to perceive the pattern. Every time Sir Charles prepared to play a winning card, the animal yapped. It was not a stray animal reacting to the moon. It was an instrument being played by a human hand. Once the method of communication was established, finding the observer with the spyglass in the room opposite was merely a matter of footwork. I shook my head in silent admiration. It is a pity the public will never read of this case, Holmes. A scandal like this would sell out the magazines. Ah, but the preservation of the Tankerville Club's dignity was paramount to the Major. Holmes smiled. And besides, Watson, the true reward is in the work itself. The application of logic to the chaotic canvas of human endeavour. What does the public praise matter when one possesses the quiet satisfaction of having untangled a knot that baffled the finest minds in Pall Mall? Holmes stood, stretching his long limbs, and walked toward the window. He pushed it open, letting the cool, rain-washed air fill the room, displacing the lingering chemical odours of his earlier experiments. The street below was quiet, the gas lamps reflecting in the puddles on the cobblestones. "Listen, Watson," Holmes said softly, gazing out into the dark city. I strained my ears, hearing only the gentle patter of the rain. "I hear nothing, Holmes." "Exactly," Holmes murmured, a contented smile playing upon his lips. "No barks, no signals, only the sound of London washed clean and a puzzle neatly solved. The game is concluded, Watson, and now I believe I shall finally be able to sleep." Thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear more stories, be sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description below.